ever attending a Christian church. Approaching 1 out of 10 coming out of college. Now, many of these kids grew up in churches. Way more than 14% went to church when they were young. Many of them probably professed Christ as their Savior. What in the world happened? Well, I think there's two basic things that's going on all around us. Incredible weapons of the enemy who is after all of our souls to drive us away from faith in who God is and what He's done for us in Jesus Christ. The first is that we live in a fallen, broken, corrupted creation. Jesus said, in this world you will have tribulation. Nobody is going to escape it. You're going to have financial problems. You're going to have health problems. The death rate of human beings is 100%. Your body is going to deteriorate. Something is going to kill you. You're going to have relationship problems. You're going to have work problems. They're going to happen. People are going to stab you in the back, lie about you, cheat, steal, and it eats away at us. And it weighs us down. And we start going through life and just losing this eternal big picture and the focus on God's presence. It just, life beats us up. That's number one. Number two, it is trained out of us. The awe of who God is and what He's done is trained out of every single one of us, especially every subsequent generation going through a public education, media, internet, museum system that 100% leaves out the reality that the Bible means what it says and where we came from and why we exist. So between those two, it should be no surprise so few people. And those 84% of people coming out of college, young folks who have no interest in Christianity, the Bible, churches, when asked why, they say, well, the church doesn't believe what I believe. So it's very, very blunt. They've been trained to disbelieve God's word and disbelieve the fundamentals of the church. Why would you spend your time there? Why would you spend your money there? Why would you spend any effort if you don't even believe what's being taught or told? So none of this is any surprise. Now, tonight's talk, I typically spend my time talking about the evidence for creation from a scientific standpoint, or things we can learn from creation, or the cultures of the world, how they've all developed in a recent time frame, or dating methods, or astronomy. I've actually developed over 20 different talks, and they're all on a layman's level, and all of my materials are the same way, easy to understand, very visual. And they often go back to Genesis as a basis for all of this. But this talk, because I'm dealing with both, I'm dealing with the fallen nature of this world and the evidence that God is creator and He's therefore in control of everything. I'm going to take us to the second greatest book on creation in the Bible. And, wonder why this isn't working. Well, I'm going to be a little bit pinned to my computer, unfortunately. And that's the book of Job. We're going to spend our time in the book of Job. And I'm going to take the first 10 or 15 minutes just retelling one of the most fantastic, factual, actual accounts of a man's life in the Bible. And that's Job himself. Now, the book of Job, for a lot of reasons, almost all theologians agree, it was penned well before the books of Moses. So it's like considered to be the oldest book in the Bible. And the things happening in the book of Job would be placed about 4,000 years ago. So that's about 500 years after the ark landed and the world started to be repopulated by the sons of Noah and their children and so on. Now, Job, if you look at the text, how old he was when disaster struck and then how long he lived before he died, he lived about 200 years. And Abraham lived about 200 years. And longevity dropped off consistently from the time of Adam, especially there was a step change after the flood from the 800 or plus years down into the 400 years, and then over the next 5 or 6 generations it dropped into the 200 years, and that's about the same as Abraham. And then by the time of Moses, he wrote the life of man is 70, maybe 80 years, and it's where it's sort of settled out. Although without modern medical practices and a real understanding of how creation operates and how to take care of it, Most people living in native countries, their lifespan is more like 40 years. So it's continued to drop off with everything going on around us. It contains incredible scientific insights, and that's a lecture all in and of itself. But it says things like, the earth hangeth upon nothing. Well, that's an absurd concept to the ancient world, but absolutely scientifically accurate as far as what you can tangibly touch, see, feel, and hear space. It addresses that first big issue, the issue of pain and suffering, but not in the way we would expect. And it provides the ultimate solution and hope. Now, you all know the story, but I'm going to retell it, okay? We get the backstory where Job is selected by God to, in my opinion, suffer more than any human being who has ever suffered, ever. Because it wasn't just physical. Probably with the exception of Jesus Christ, who is fully God and fully man. That man lost everything. See, it says Job was born of 7 sons. He had 7 sons, 3 daughters, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 ox, 500 donkeys, a great household, the greatest man to live in all the earth of the East. See, he was like the richest man conceivable, unbelievably wealthy, with a huge family, blessed. And he's described as a righteous man. God pointed him out as someone who follows him. And so he says, sure, you gave him all this stuff. Why wouldn't he? So go ahead and test him. And it's an example for all of us. Now, Job lost all 10 children in a flash. I can't imagine the pain when you lose one child. Our oldest son, 4 years ago, was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma with tumors on his spine, expected to go into his brain, incredible pain, and spread to every lymph node in his body. It was really, really bad. Now, God ultimately healed him, and he's now a missionary in Africa. And our thank you, because our unbelievably precious daughter-in-law, Michael's wife, just 2 months ago has been diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer that spread to her liver and lymph nodes. And she's in really bad shape. But God's done it once, he can do it again. He may not. But we know the end picture. And there's this incredible hope we have that people around us don't have. But the pain is there, and it doesn't even go away. Now, all 10, all at once, incredible emotional pain. And then he loses all his wealth. To go from a trillionaire to not even having anything, no money, nothing to even survive on. Think of the pain of that, to lose your livelihood and have no hope of it coming back. And then to lose his health, all at the same time, to the point he's scraping his body with pottery covered, but from the soles of his feet to the head of his hair with oozing, pus-filled, bleeding boils. And the only relief is to scrape yourself so hard, you have more pain from being scraped than the boils themselves are bringing. And it won't go away no matter what you do. All at the same time, and none of it having any seeming purpose or reason for it, and all of it at once. And Satan's challenge is, you take away his wealth, you take away his health, you take away his family, he won't serve you. And what's Job's response? Naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return. The Lord gave, the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. What a witness. What a man. Start to see why God selected him as this example for all of us. And all this, Job sent not, but charged the God foolishly. Now, this is one of my favorite verses of the Bible, okay? Right in the middle of this now 32 long chapter dialogue between him and 3 other supposed friends, he makes this statement, because their entire focus is, if you had just obeyed God better, if you had just worked harder, if you've just done things right, this wouldn't be happening to you. And now if you start doing things better, then you will be redeemed, you will be saved, everything will get better. Do you understand what I'm describing? Works salvation. If we do things better, everything turns out. It's us that's making it happen. You understand, that is the primary lie of Satan from the very beginning to Adam and Eve, and it's the thing that distorts and destroys every Christian denomination ultimately, because they gravitate toward that, because it feeds human pride. We're doing it, not what you've done for us. And it's all a lie. And Job refused to admit that it was true. So he passed every test. And in the midst of it all, he makes this statement: I know that my Redeemer, I'm not going to redeem myself. I'm not going to be good enough. I didn't bring this upon myself. God is the one that will redeem all things. I know my Redeemer liveth, and he shall stand in the latter days upon the earth. Who's he talking about? See, God had already revealed to people, I think all the way back to Adam, that he was going to come and take care of our sin problem. And it kept following Old Testament figure after Old Testament figure until Jesus showed up. There's no excuse for not knowing who he was when he showed up. So what happens next? The longest monologue by the Creator, the mighty, holy, holy, holy God, the Redeemer of the entire universe, including the chapters where Jesus is talking. 3 solid, non-stop chapters of God himself speaking to us in Scripture. And what does he talk about? Doesn't talk about why evil exists. Doesn't talk about why what is happening to Job is happening to him. He talks about what he has made. He talks about creation for 3 solid chapters to the man in the most agony of any human being that has ever happened. Now there's a purpose and a reason for all that. He starts by saying, where were you, Job, when I laid the very foundations of the earth, and by implication the whole universe? Declare if you have understanding. See, he's just starting off by putting this perspective between the two of us, who God is and who we are. And after this 3-chapter monologue, this is Job's response. I know, Job knows, and he always has known, that God can do everything, and even our thoughts can't be withheld from you. So he knows God's character, and he's known it his whole life, and he's followed and done his best thing he can do to follow that. He says, I have heard of you by the hearing of your ear. Now I highlighted this next sentence for a reason, because this just blew me away when I connected these two things, okay? But now my eye sees you. Now, did God physically stand in a physical form that Job's eyes could see in front of him while he gave this 3-chapter monologue? Obviously not. Now, it was revealed to Job, either a vision or through his mind, exactly what was being said, but he wasn't looking at God, okay? But he says, my eyes have seen you. And when we compare ourselves at our best hope of righteousness with God's holiness, this is always the response. I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. Because we're all sinful no matter how righteous we are. None of us are ever going to get to heaven on our own merits. Now, I want you to look at that. So what does he mean, now my eyes have seen you? God's just talked about creation for 3 chapters. That's Old Testament. You know, the things that matter in the Bible, God makes crystal clear. In crystal clear language. And he repeats them over and over, and they show up in the Old Testament, and then they show up again in the New Testament. Compare that with this verse in the New Testament. This is from the book of Romans. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes have been clearly seen. Job said, now my eyes have seen you. Paul says, by looking at creation, God's very Godhead in his power can be clearly seen, his nature and power, by looking at what he has made. We can see him in that way. See the similarity? One's saying the same thing the other one's saying. So everybody who has ever been born, no matter when, no matter where, no matter how smart, no matter what they do for a living, every human being is without excuse for believing God by looking at what he has made. This is really important. This is a starting point for a lost culture who has lost its awe in God. So I just want to wrap up before I start looking at some of the things God has made, which is just fun. It's so awe-inspiring when you let it be and you don't become hardened. So after this, the very last chapter, the Lord blesses Job in the second half of his life even more than the beginning. He had twice as many sheep, twice as many camels, twice as many oxen, twice as many donkeys, and he was given 7 more sons and daughters. Why didn't he double the number of kids? He doubled everything else. Why did he only get given 10 kids? See, we tend to read through Scripture and just go on instead of pondering some things that are there because they're so important. You see, if God had given Job 20 kids, it would be like saying, well, those first 10 kids, they no longer exist. I got to double them because those first 10 are gone. They're not gone. They've simply stepped through a door that we can't step through yet. And they're still there. Their spirit and their soul is every bit as alive as it was when it was in their physical body. They're still there. And they're either going to spend eternity with their Creator and Redeemer, or they're going to spend their eternity separated from their Creator and Redeemer, but they're still in existence. So by only giving Job 10 children, in the Old Testament, we have this phenomenal picture that death isn't all there, isn't the end of everything. And so here are the lessons from the book, fabulous book on the character of God. Pain and suffering are not caused by God. We live in a fallen creation because we brought it upon ourselves. See, the world is clueless because they've denied Genesis. They misinterpret the rock layers. They pour millions and billions of years into it. By default, that has to be, there have been millions of years of death and disease and cancer and bloodshed and extinction. And therefore, God just made things that way. He's the author of death. It has nothing to do with us. It's why so many people get mad at God and walk away from Him. Because it starts by misinterpreting history. It's there because if death didn't exist, we would make perfect copies of every cell that reproduced. Our physical bodies would live forever, and we would be forever separated from our Creator. We're sinful, He's not. So death is literally an act of love on His part, knowing before the creation of the universe we were going to sin, and knowing He was going to set that plan into action to take that penalty upon Himself that we could never pay. See, it all fits and wraps together in one big ball of reality. But the world lives in fantasy, pretending it's reality, while we have reality and we don't share it with people in a way they're going to understand it and help them understand what's going on. Second, trusting God in times of suffering. He is going to allow suffering in your life. Guaranteed. You are going to suffer. And if you didn't, how would you ever have empathy with those who did? How would you ever build perseverance? How would you ever build trust with God? How would you ever build strength of character? Unless there was suffering. And we've got to look at it from that perspective and trust God. And we may not get rewarded in this life, but this is, I can't even begin to illustrate the infinitesimal little piece of our eternal life this physical life is compared to eternity. It's a flash in the pan. It's a mist that rises in the morning and is going in the evening. It's grass that flower that blooms and fades. It's so fast. Scripture describes it over and over again in those ways. Next, Job ends by reminding us that this life is not all there is, and we're not just gone when we die. That's the whole point. He was only given 10 children because those other 10 aren't gone. God did double the number of children Job had. And that's the reality of hope that we have when our loved ones dies. It still hurts. It still stings. It's still terrible because we brought it upon ourselves. But, oh death, where is thy sting? It's lessened because we know this isn't all there is. And then last, focusing on God. And we can't see Him, and at times we don't feel Him, and we don't hear Him, and He is silent at times. But we can always see what he's made. And when we really understand creation and what we can learn from it using the tool of science and observation and how it operates, we absolutely know it couldn't have made itself. We absolutely know chemicals could never come alive. We absolutely know sin is judged, and the worldwide flood was a real thing, and those rock layers were laid down recently and rapidly, and there haven't been these millions and billions of years. We know it. And it's a solid foundation that nothing can shake, but only if we trust God's word and then use what he's given us, our intellect, our mind, our abilities to observe what he's made. And it moves us past focusing on ourselves and our problems in his majesty. And that's what we're going to do for the last half of this lecture. I picked just 7 things that God made, 7 creatures. And I picked the ones I picked because they illustrate both his unbelievable awesomeness, but they illustrate how evolution is so impossible. It's an absurdity to believe in it. Now I'm going to start with not the big animals, the lions and tigers and bears, oh my, or the elephants or the big critters. I'm going to start with just a little fish, okay? Now this guy, and by the way, every one of these is just one page out of one of the 5 different every day of the week devotionals that I've published over the last 15 years. And people give these books away by the caseload, because as a nonprofit ministry, I price things just enough over my cost, and I print everything myself. You can afford to give them away. So beautiful, full color, 440 page, every page illustrated hardcover books. They're $7 each when you buy them in multiple copies. Everything on our book table is 3 for $25, so they're $8 each. And even then, about half of that money goes to buy books to give away to high school students in every high school that I'm allowed to come and speak in, which in the United States is 0. But in now 6 foreign nations, we have now given away 214,000 of these books, following a 1-hour science assembly, which I'll show you some pictures of at the very end, and every single student hearing for 10 minutes how much the one who obviously made them loves them and died for them because they can't pay for their own sinfulness. And it's the only way they're ever going to live for eternity with that Creator. And they get to hear that message and the evidence that supports it, and have a book to read, which is often the only book they will ever own. And they'll read it over and over and share it. So those 214,000, I conservatively estimate they've probably been read by 2 million people in these foreign countries, because their parents and their siblings and their friends, they get to read it too. We'll come back to that later. So the first one, this was on June 23rd of Have You Considered, one of the devotionals. And it's about a fish who does something that's absolutely astounding that no other fish does. And the narrator here is David Edinburgh. He's an avid evolutionist who everything he shows, he attributes everything about it to evolution. Evolution explains everything, okay? And the point he has for this fish is he calls it nature's greatest artist. And it approaches the idea of, why does beauty exist? Where does beauty come from? I'm going to come back to that. Watch what this fish creates. Okay. Oh, we need to turn this on.
Charging. Please wait.
Okay, hang on. Okay. What I'm going to have to do is hold my microphone down to the computer. I do this overseas all the time when the sound system doesn't work. Okay?
Could try to reconnect on Bluetooth.
We're just going to use it this way. This will work. Okay, so here we go. Okay. Okay, hang on. This worked when we first tried it before we started up, and now the sound is trying to come over Bluetooth and it's not. Let's try it one more time. Okay. Hang on, I gotta play with this. Okay, I need to get it off of Bluetooth, go to my soundboard, have it come out of the computer. So let's try that. Sound.
Part of the problem is turned off. If you go Bluetooth.
Okay, I'm being told to go back to Bluetooth. So
I'm gonna try it.
So where do I find
Critical
Bluetooth?
battery. Please
Oh,
charge.
it's critical battery. Oh,
See.
yeah, okay. Yeah, you just take it off.
Okay, this will work fine. But how do I get it back to my output? Hang on.
Yeah, this is disconnected.
Speakers. We'll try this. Okay, now let me try it again.
A female's attention, he creates something
Yep.
that almost defies belief.
Okay. Back. Just a second. Huh. Well, I'm sorry, folks. I'm going to restart this. I don't know what's going on. Now it won't even project.
There we go.
Any young people up here that know computers really well? It doesn't even project now when I open my PowerPoint. Let me open it from a different file. Okay. It's right here. Okay, so here it is. Okay. Let's just, okay, we'll just zip through all the slides. Because when I slide it down, it doesn't seem to want to work.
Gotcha.
Okay, try it again.
Unfortunately, this small Japanese pufferfish is dull almost to the point of invisibility. But to compensate, he is probably nature's greatest artist.
It's not picking it up very well.
To grab a female's attention, he creates something
Can you guys hear it all?
almost
Yes.
defies belief. His only tools are his fins.
There we go.
In his head, a plan of mathematical perfection. He ploughs the sand, breaking it up into the finest of particles. These shells aren't just rubbish to be removed. He uses them to decorate the bridges of his construction. He can't rest for more than a moment, but must work 24 hours a day for a week, or the current will destroy his creation. A final tidy up, and his masterpiece is complete. does an animal construct something as complex and perfect as this. If this doesn't get him noticed, nothing will.
So you heard that last statement by an atheist, by an evolutionist. If making this beautiful sculpture doesn't get this dude to catch himself a babe, nothing will. Now, why does he say that? Because from the moment Charles Darwin proposed this idea that one animal, chemicals just came alive and then formed life, and then simple life, and bacteria turned into fish that turned into land animals, turned into monkeys, and ultimately us, he was troubled by the idea of beauty. Why should an animal waste all sorts of energy to create all sorts of beautiful structures that serve no particular purpose? So it's got to have a purpose. Beauty exists because it has a purpose. And that's ultimately what people after Darwin proposed as a scientific fact. Matter of fact, this is a statement Darwin made. He said, the sight of a feather, a beautiful, iridescent, colorful looking eye built in the middle of the feather of a peacock, whenever I gaze at it, makes me sick. Because he knew it contradicted the idea that it all just made itself for no particular purpose other than it had an advantage. And that's what David Attenborough was saying, and that's what they've said all along. When I grew up in the 70s, I remember being told that flowers are beautifully colored so they can attract insects better. Except we then found out insects are essentially colorblind. So it's just a story. And when you test the stories of evolution, they turn out not to be wrong. And he tested one of these. It's another page in one of the devotionals. About 15 years ago or so, a group of scientists decided, well, let's test this. So they took a male peacock and they cut off all the beautiful iridescent eyelet things on the end of their feathers. So this male peacock was pug ugly, okay? He had all these stalks sticking out behind him, but no beautiful feathers. And then they had a big field, and they would send that male peacock out there with a bunch of really good-looking guys. And then they would send in a peahen. And they statistically followed it week after week and kept track of it. Does she statistically pick the really good-looking guys or the really ugly guy more often? Guess what? The beauty made zero difference. See, beauty exists because it reflects the nature of our Creator. And it's for our enjoyment and our awe of who He is. That's why beautiful animals like this exist. Now, the second animal I'm going to give you, because we all love these superheroes, okay? The kids are infatuated with them. And I grew up with comic books, and I got to admit I enjoy them too. And they all got these lots of powers of strength and flying and abilities and transporting themselves. But my favorite was always been invisibility, the superheroes that can become invisible. Except God already invented it, not as a fantasy, but as reality. And He did it in this little creature called the sea sapphire. Now, this guy is this brilliant sapphire blue color, and he's only about 1/4 of an inch long. So he's not very big, but when you look at him straight on, and by the way, the reason color exists, the light, when it goes through a prism, is broken into different wavelengths as they go through the light at different distances, and you get the 7 basic colors of a rainbow. Well, I guess I don't have a very colorful shirt. I need something. Okay. Right back here, we've got a beautiful lady with kind of mostly orange shirt. That's because when white light hits that shirt, everything except the orange in those areas is absorbed and the orange bounces back. That's why it looks orange. This guy looks blue because when light hits him, all of those other colors are absorbed and the blue bounces back. Now, he is made with millions of tiny little microscopic transparent plates. Think of butterfly scales. And they're set at an absolutely perfect distance between the layers of plates, that it corresponds to the wavelength of blue light. When he turns, The light, instead of bouncing back, it literally passes through. That wavelength that causes it to bounce changes a little bit. His body is made of transparent, soluble proteins inside, like our eyeball, that are also transparent. So now, everything is either absorbed or it goes right through the plates on the front, right through the body, right through the plates on the bottom, bounces off the bottom of the ocean and comes back through, and we can see the bottom of the ocean as if he doesn't even exist. As soon as he turns, he becomes invisible, and you can see right through him. Isn't it? Now the design, the engineering, the perfection with which every part of his body is made has to all be there all at once, or nothing works. And there's no other creature like this in creation. Here's a little flipped video that shows what he does. So here he is floating, he just turned. You see that? You can see the ocean underneath of him. This animal literally has the power of invisibility. A predator's chasing him, he'll turn, and he can no longer be seen. He becomes invisible. Isn't that cool? Isn't that awesome? God is so awesome. And it's the complexity of it all that points to the Creator. You see, if you look at anything as simple as an electric motor, it has dozens of parts. And every part has to be the right shape, the right size, put in the right position, and they all have to be there or nothing works. There are bacteria that have 40 little proteins, and those proteins form little perfectly shaped parts that are all in the right place, the right position, the right size, the right shape, and they all have to be there for a little electric motor to turn a little cilia hair behind a bacteria so it can swim around. Multiple parts, the perfect size, don't come together by accident. Systems don't make themselves, and that's what this is. So example number 3 is just looking at the intelligence that reflects the intelligence of the Creator of seemingly insignificant creatures. And we're going to look at the hummingbee. Now, the hummingbee has a brain about the size of a grain of sand. And we have this enormous brain that's way more powerful, okay? Well, Princeton University scientists decided we're going to check how quick bees can learn. Now, we knew bees can communicate in this really unique way. So they set up this experiment. And what bees do when they find a really rich source of food, like a field full of flowers, the bee that finds it first will fly back to the hive and tell the other bees where it's at. And then a whole bunch of bees will come and collect nectar for their hive. So these scientists, they had a bunch of beehives and they marked the bees for one particular hive. Now, I think it was like a radiation marker so they could hold an instrument and know when a bee from that hive showed up. Then they put a source of food 150 feet away, like a real rich nectar. Then they would open the hive, let the bees out, and stand there and wait. And a bee would show up, and they would know it was a bee from that hive, and they would start a stopwatch. That bee would fly back to its hive, okay? And it would do a little dance. Now, clear back in the 1960s, scientists figured this out. The bee does a very intricate and specific dance. Whoops, I'm gonna click ahead. It lines its dance line, the line of the dance up, at exactly the same angle as where the food is from where the sun is in the sky. Like if the sun is right here from the hive and the flowers are here, it will dance 115 degrees from the vertical line of the honeycombs. So the bee's telling them in the direction it's going, where to fly, what direction. Then whether it goes around in a series of circles or a series of figure eights, the bees know whether it's more or less than 100 feet away and how far they need to fly and the number of times it goes around. Isn't that cool? I mean, that in itself is just astounding. I mean, imagine explaining this by evolution. Millions of years ago, a bee found a really great flower, and he knew his hive would survive better if he could tell everybody else. So he came back, and he knew he had to tell it which direction to fly. So he started wiggling his butt and walking in a line to tell them the right angle. Well, guess what? The other bees are saying, well, George is having an epileptic fit. They're not going to know what he's doing. How does that make any sense? God, now we're talking about instincts. Instincts exist not for any logical scientific reason, but because they had to have been programmed by the creator of the creature. So now the scientists move, they cover up the food, the bees disperse, then they move the food 300 feet away. By the way, it took 10 minutes for the bee to fly back, tell the others, and the other bees to show up. Well, 300 feet away, it still took 10 minutes, which they thought was kind of interesting, so then they moved it 450 feet away. Still, the bees came back, told the friends, came back, and so on. Then they moved, picked up the food after the bees had left, carried the food in the same direction, same trajectory, 600 feet, put the food down, uncovered it, turned on their radiation detector, and there's hundreds of bees from that hive in that exact spot waiting for them to show up with the food. Isn't that astounding? The little insect with a grain of sand brain calculated the pattern, calculated the trajectory, and instead of wasting energy flying back to the hive, they flew on ahead and waited for it to show up. Outsmarting the Princeton researchers with their huge, massive brain. Isn't it cool? God is just so awesome in the things he does. So number 4, and I use this one just to introduce you. Part of what I do is try to approach a lost, darkening culture who is denying and losing the awe of God from all sorts of different angles. The evidence angle, the biblical angle, the fact that creation is there for our benefit angle. And I do a whole lecture on discoveries of mankind based on what God has made that have changed all of human history, not just understanding the principles of creation. Now this is just a neat invention that came because we looked at creation and what God has made. And I make these little 3-minute videos, 2 to 3 minute, on average they're about 3 minutes long, and I send them out every 2 weeks. I've made about 80 of these videos. And one of the resources is a flash drive with 20 hours of creation videos, and there's about 60 of these videos on that flash drive. And I want you to see, when they come in the mail, they cost absolutely nothing, they're this reminder God's behind everything. He's behind where we came from, He's behind our allowing the problems in our life, He's behind the solutions and the hope we have, He's behind everything we can look, touch, see, feel, and hear. And we need to remind ourselves of that at times. And I want you to watch this one of the videos to get a feel for how you could just forward these to people on your email list. Is that reminder of God's there. You know, every few weeks we all need these reminders. But this one's about this little slug. You know, God told us to take dominion over creation in the book of Genesis. That means to study, understand, and control it. Now why? Because we can learn so much from it. I mean, we can even learn from a slug. A slug, you say? Yeah. It turns out that there's a certain kind of slug that lives in northern Europe, that slugs, when they move, they leave a slime trail. It's just kind of a sticky, gooey, watery thing. You can actually see their trail as they're crawling along. Well, scientists started to study this slug from Europe, and they realized their slime is very, very elastic, which means you can stretch it and it'll snap back, and very, very sticky. Now, for years, scientists have used things like super glue to bind up wounds, and they thought, it's a little toxic and it turns a little brittle. What we need is a really flexible glue that will stay sticky. And they discovered this slug slime and thought, these has the perfect characteristics for glue. Now don't get too excited about, having some slug slime slapped onto your cut, because it takes a lot of slugs to form enough slime to fit the market. And slug slime farms aren't exactly practical, because the slugs only exude this kind of slime when they're scared, because they don't want birds. Like if a bird's flying overhead, out comes the sticky slug slime glue. And if the bird comes and tries to pull the slug off the sidewalk, it's stuck to the sidewalk. So the only way to get the sticky glue is to scare the slugs. And slug slime farms aren't exactly practical. I mean, you set up a movie theater, you put all your slugs on the seats, and you show them movies of scary birds, and then you scrape the slug slime sticky glue off the seats. I mean, not exactly practical. So what do? They figured out how to synthesize it. And we now have the formula for sticky slug-slime glue that is currently being used to seal up wounds. Isn't that cool? Because we figured out what God did first. So we can learn from creation, develop products that benefit us in a multitude of ways, even slug-slime glue. What a slugger of an idea. So, we need to be creative and winsome and interesting and relevant as we're explaining why you should trust the Bible. That's the value of these sort of things. Now, number 5, all these overseas science assemblies, we highlight a page out of the book the kids are going to get. And since a lot of these are Pacific islands surrounded by water, this is the example we use, and it's the oopu fish. Now, this fish is unique of all other fish in the world. There's a certain classification of fish called gobies who have like mouth suckers, and they use those suckers to climb up water to get to other places on rivers and such. But this one is completely different than having a mouth sucker. Now, it's not very big. It's only about 6 inches long, not very colorful, and looks like he's got a black eye. He's been in a fight. But he lives in only one place, and that's off the big island of Hawaii, in the salt water. And like a salmon, he spends his whole life in the salt water, but he has to come into fresh water to lay her eggs. If she lays it in salt water, the eggs are going to die. There'll be no more oopu fish. The fish is extinct. Got to be in the fresh water. But the only source of fresh water anywhere around the habitat of this oopu fish is at the top of a 420-foot tall waterfall. If the fish lays her eggs down here, they're going to get flushed out into the ocean and they're going to die. She's got to get to the top of the waterfall, swim upstream and lay her eggs, and then they hatch, they become fry, and they eventually wash back down and out into the ocean. That's the life cycle. But how does a fish get to the top of a 400-foot tall waterfall? Well, I asked the students this, and they've heard of flying fish, so they'll always get the answer of a flying fish, and we'll show them one and explain. They don't fly. They just have been given and designed fins that have been modified so when stretched out, they glide really well. And sometimes they can jump as much as 20 feet above the water and maybe glide 100 feet, especially when being chased. But they can't flap them, and they could never go 400 feet high. And other students will say, well, maybe they climb. And I say, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Kind of like maybe Spider-Man. And all these kids have seen all the American movies, and they roar with laughter. And I say, great idea, but wrong movie. And this is kind of fun. I'll sometimes hum this little tune. Dun, 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 dun. Anybody know the movie I'm talking about? Mission Impossible. And they all know it too, just from the little tune. And I say, in one of those movies, Ethan Hunt, he uses suction cups to climb up a glass 120-story high tower in Dubai. And that's what God put on this fish. The only fish in all of creation has a perfectly formed suction cup between its pelvic fins on its chest. Now what it does, it takes that suction cup and it runs over to the waterfall, swims over it, and it slams itself against the rock. And then it shoves and sticks and shoves and sticks. And it takes 2 to 3 days, and it will free climb a 420-foot sheer cliff with water flowing down past it, and then swim upstream. Now, how does evolution explain this? It can't. It's an absurdity. Because it couldn't have been born with a perfectly formed suction cup. You ever try to use a suction cup that's not shaped right, or it has the wrong amount of stiffness? It doesn't work. And what good is half a suction cup? It's just kind of flapping away, being a detriment. The fish is going to get eaten and he's going to go extinct. And what if a fish was born with a suction cup? And then the little fish looks down and it says, Mama, what's this thing on my stomach? Well, I don't know, son. Kind of ugly, isn't it? It's not going to know what to do with it. If it needed it and it didn't have it, it would die. And if it didn't need it, it's wasted a bunch of energy and it slows it down and it's a detriment and it's going to die. See, evolution has these 2 enormous problems we've got to keep pointing out to the people around us. Scientifically, it does not work. When we observe it, when we test it, it doesn't work. It's just this superficial faith explanation. It's one faith that God's never been involved and everything's done itself, versus another faith that God has done certain things miraculously, and then he's built the whole universe to work by the laws of science. And that's true. But it's an assumption that he's never done the things he said he's done. And they make sense because they couldn't have done themselves. Now, last two examples. Again, here's an animal that does what no other vertebrate, no other animal with a backbone in the entire animal kingdom can do what this guy does. It's the marine iguana, again, one of the pages out of the book. And he's a vegetarian, lives on the Galapagos Islands, and he has to get his food, he's a marine iguana, in the saltwater, in the coral reefs. Except these coral reefs are surrounded by sharks. Sharks have really lousy eyesight, but really good hearing. Now, this guy has a pretty big heart. I mean, he's like 4 foot long. And when he goes in the water and he's swimming around, his heart's going boom, 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 boom. But the shark just zeroes in on that, and it's like, oh man, a bratwurst sandwich, and he's got this great big snack. Okay? So, what's he gonna do? Because he's gonna get eaten. So you got George and Frank sitting there, and they're both hungry. And George says, man, I'm so hungry, but if I go out there, the sharks are gonna get me. And Frank says, well, I gotta go. And he goes out and he goes swimming, and it's like a shark goes, whoa, and there goes Frank. And George is thinking, oh man, I'm gonna die if I don't get some food. But I'm gonna die if I go and do get some food. So here's what he does. He turns his heart off. So now he can't be heard. Now, as he's down there just kind of having a good old time swimming around, chomping on the vegetation, he can go swimming for up to 40 minutes with no heartbeat. Shuts it down. Has a great big meal, his stomach's nice and full, comes crawling back up onto the shore, and then he dies. Because he forgot to evolve the ability to start his heart back up. You start to get the point, there had to be hundreds of complex changes in that creature's body to be able to survive without a heartbeat for 40 minutes, to pump blood around, to get oxygen other ways, to survive without as much oxygen. And then there had to be ways to trigger it on desire, not involuntarily, to be able to turn your heart on and off at will. There's no ancestral background to this. That creature's just been created to do that. And it's astounding. Last example is the God wit. Now I like this because he's not called the evolution wit. He's the God wit. Now this bird has the longest non-stop migration by far. There's not even a close second of any other bird in the avian kingdom. Now in the winter, he lives in Alaska, up here, where it's a food smorgasbord in the summer. And he's just eating all sorts of good food, and the whales are moving up there, and the krill are everywhere, and there's all sorts of fish and all sorts of animals, and they're just having a good old time until it starts to get cold. And then he realizes, hey, I gotta get out of here before I freeze. Well, in the summer, he lives in New Zealand. Now that is a 7,000 mile flight, but it has to be nonstop. There are no islands. There is no place to stop between Alaska and New Zealand. And he's got these long, spindly, stocky legs, and unlike a seagull, if he lands on the water, he can't take off again. So he has to flap his wings non-stop for between 5 and 7 days, 24 hours a day, never stopping flapping them for 5 to 7 days. Scientists did this study where they know how many BTUs it takes of energy to flap down each time and pull back up each time. And they know how much energy you can get out of the fat that they measured in these birds. And they discovered it's scientifically impossibility for it to fly that far because it doesn't have enough fuel. Except it does. Because they measured it at the wrong time. They measured it well before it left. This is what happens. For the last few weeks before the bird takes off, it eats and eats and eats and eats and has a 55% weight gain in 2 weeks. So it's like, me, I weigh up, but so let's say I don't quite weigh that much, but say I weigh 200 pounds. 2 weeks from now, I would weigh 315 pounds, 310 pounds. But the problem is, now I would look like the Goodyear blimp, and so does the bird. And it's still not aerodynamic enough to fly well. So before it takes off, the last few days, it eliminates water from its body and its fat. So the fat becomes like real hard beef tallow, but it's still filled with energy and BTUs. It's still too fat, so right before it takes off, all of its internal organs shrivel up. Its stomach goes paper flat, its intestines go paper flat, its kidneys flatten out because it doesn't need any of those things. And the fat then fills in all those cavities and it's really streamlined. So now it can fly 7 days nonstop. And the babies, the parents sleep before the babies, the ones born that year, they've never even been shown how to get there. And they fly there too without anybody showing them how to get there. Isn't it all just astounding what God can do? Now here's where I want to wrap up and then talk a little bit about some resources and other stuff we do. There's a thing called bioluminescence in our world, and it wasn't until the 1960s we figured out how to do that. Now it's real common for us because we can buy these things we call light sticks, where we just mix two chemicals together and it becomes a very bright light. But the thing is, bioluminescence in nature, the chemicals vary slightly and they give off different wavelengths depending on the version of the same basic chemical that's used. Now the scientists that discovered this worked at the Naval Weapons Lab out in California. I spoke at a church out there and they told me, this stuff was just discovered down the street. And he got to name the chemicals, he was a chemist, that when you put them together, they give off light energy. And he called them luciferine and luciferase. When you mix those two basic categories of chemicals together, it has a reaction that gives off light. Anybody notice the root word there? Lucifer. Anybody remember one of the titles Lucifer is given? The light bearer, or the angel of light. Yeah, so it's like he took a scriptural reference to name these chemicals. But there are 38 different, completely separated, having no absolute common lineage of animals that have been given the ability to create light using two chemicals that they keep separated in special areas and only mix together along with a catalyst when they need light. That is a complex system. You got to contain the chemicals, you got to keep them separated, you got to produce them, you got to have them show on the outside of your body, so it's got to have a transparent area, and you have to have a catalyst to make it all work. And the knowledge and ability to do it at the right time. And it shows up 38 different times in creation. Now, one of them were those jellyfish. Another one is plankton. And this isn't lights on the shore, this is a bunch of plankton slamming against a bunch of sand, and it activates the chemicals that cause light. It's like a bunch of blue glowing in the water. In the Amazon, they have green mushrooms. Wouldn't you just love to go walking in the forest and see all this green light up ahead, and the whole forest is covered with green glowing mushrooms? Down deep in the ocean, there are squid that don't just produce one color, they're literally like a billboard. They create blue and green and orange and yellow, and they change the light patterns on and off, and they flash different patterns across the back of their body as they're swimming along. Just absolutely gorgeous and stunning. I love this one. It's called the anglerfish. Kind of looks like this, and it's got a light bulb on a stalk out in front of its head. And when it wants to, it's swimming along, and it'll just suddenly either turn on or turn off this light bulb. And the other little fish, and this guy lives like 1,000 feet or more below the surface of the water, where even photons don't get there. Total, absolute darkness. And the fish are thinking, "Oh, what's that light over there?" And it's like, womp, he gets his supper. It's like, the complexity is absolutely stunning. And what's the one we all know about? The most common thing that we see that makes light, a lightning bug. You all just guessed it. And there's certain kinds that can flash them on and off in sequences. Others will turn them on and leave them on. And they do have a function. Lots of times beauty and stuff God makes has functions, but other times it's just made for His glory. Now, here's where I wrap up this lecture. If God can put a light bulb on the butt of a bug just because He wants to, a light bulb on a bug's butt, don't you think that same God knows when we're having problems? And don't you think He could have stopped them if He'd have wanted to? And don't you think He can get us through them if we trust Him? And don't you think that's the attitude we need to display to the world around us when we have those problems? And lean on Him for the strength to do it, and He'll give us that strength. Final scripture. You who are children of the light, and that's what God calls us. We reflect the light of the one who is the way, the truth, and the light. And we are the children of the day. We used to be the children of the night. We used to be the enemies of God. We used to be the sons of Satan. We used to not even have the ability to not sin, because it's our inherent nature. But Christ did so much more than just save us on that cross. It goes way deeper than that. We now are indwelled by His very nature and His Spirit. And we have the ability to choose not to sin, where we didn't before. But we have to choose it. That's why it tells us what to do, because it's not like we don't have the ability. Now we have that ability. We who are of the day, be sober, put on faith and love, even for those who hate us, and the helmet, which is the hope, the actual assurance of salvation, because He's provided that for us. Now, I want to wrap up. How am I doing on time? I can't see that clock. Someone tell me what time it is.
It's 10 after. But
Oh my goodness.
You're fine.
I only going to go 5 more minutes, because I want to give you an update. I was here 4 years ago. This was 2021. We had been on a lot of creation missions trips. At that point, we'd been to Fiji and the Philippines primarily. Since then, we've been to the Cook Islands. That's been after COVID. We've been to Peru. That's after COVID. We've been to Jamaica. That's after COVID. We've actually been to 6 different countries now. Every country we go to, outside of the Western, highly developed Australia, New Zealand, European, American type countries, we have an open door to bring credible scientific speakers into public high schools and present the evidence that they have a creator, because they're not antagonistic toward it. These countries, they still, for the most part, believe that God exists. And often they're confused about why their textbooks are filled with all this stuff about evolution, but scientists are saying it, so it must be true. So we can actually go and show them that you're just being taught a different religion that contradicts the idea, and it doesn't work and it doesn't make sense. And then we can end with the gospel message. We get to tee up a ball that says, you can know you have a creator, and God holds you accountable for it. Therefore, He holds you accountable for obeying Him. You don't have to just wish or wonder or hope or even believe that God exists. You can know He exists. And then we give them the evidence. And then we say, but way more important than that is to know how much He loves you, every single one of you. Individually, He knows you, loves you, and He holds you accountable for believing and obeying Him. And then we lay out what Jesus has done. Now, just this last year, we've had the privilege of bringing along scientists from the Institute for Creation Research, scientists from Answers in Genesis, and I've got a team of people to choose from as we go, and we always bring 2 to 10 speakers. And I'm told over and over again, there's no other creation organization out there that is using the public education system to bring the gospel message to an entire generation in a country. And it's just stunning what God has done, because I mean, it's really basically just Robin and I. We're this little 2-cart, pony-driven ministry. But I think if ICR was driving it, there would be enormous opposition. So God uses the humble to do these amazing things. Now here's the kind of things that go on. It's just a little quick overview of what's happened in this period from 217 to 225. And for 2 years it was shut down by COVID worldwide. So it's really only been a 6-year thing. We are using the evidence for creation to connect the Bible to reality, whereas for 100 years in America, the education system has been used to disconnect the Bible from reality with predictable results. So there's a huge mountain of opposition that builds up in people's minds when we present the gospel or the Bible as true. I mean, Jesus said things like, if you don't believe Moses and the prophets, how will you believe one even though he rise from the dead? Or if you don't believe me when I tell you of earthly things, how will you believe me when I tell you of heavenly things? See, they're all connected. So here's a typical assembly. There's about 800 kids sitting there. And here's what we do. We show them how science works. It's just a tool. We show them the Bible's not just a book of religion, but it deals with reality, including science. That the very laws of science point to creation, and we do it in a very fun, interesting, visual way. That the complexity of life shows it could never have made itself. That there's no way you could transform the genetic information of an ape and have it turn into a human, and all these skulls are just fantasy. They're either variations of apes or they're bones of humans that were mixed with apes, and they're just being combined falsely. And the rocks and the fossils, this is probably the most important point. They are there because of the judgment of mankind's sin in a real world restructuring flood. And if that's true, then the time frames you're hearing about can't possibly be true. And we spend a good hunk of time talking about soft dinosaur tissue and how one of the most common fossils you can find is called coprolite. And we let them touch and feel and even taste these pieces of coprolite, and then we tell them what it is. Oh, by the way, that's fossilized dinosaur poop. And when your dog poops, does it turn into a solid rock? No, something very different happened in the past. And they're not dumb. They understand these things. And then lastly, we end by showing them how when you train people, even brilliant scientists, to think in a way that leaves God out, they become blind to any other possibility, to the point even when you put the obvious in front of them, they can't comprehend it. And that's an absolute psychological fact. It's called brainwashing. So we have now spoken in 481 schools. We've given 595 presentations with different teams of people to 214,000 students, 18 different trips over these years to 6 nations. And now we're being asked to go to Kenya, to go to Rwanda, to go to Guatemala, and other countries. And I'm overwhelmed. We're actually getting together as a ministry and talking about how do we do this? Where do we go from here? And is it really, we need to hire someone full-time, because we really just have a lot of part-time people helping out. So I don't know what God's doing, but it's exciting. So here's the students. I just want you to look at them hanging over balconies here in the Philippines at schools, just enjoying the presentation as we bring out dinosaurs. We're talking about, we're told all dinosaurs have went extinct for 60 million years, and then one chases me across the stage. And these are high school kids, and it just breaks up the presentation. And they love it. And you can just see the enjoyment on their face. So we're using the education system to connect the Bible to reality, but we're not out to create a bunch of little creation believers. We're out to connect them to their Savior. And we get to present the gospel in public schools to all these students. And we're impacting an entire generation with biblical truth. And they love the book, because they don't have books. You hand one of these books to an American kid, and oh, that's nice. You hand it to one of these kids, and they'll read it cover to cover, and then show it and share it with others. And then we have these salvation calls. And look at these kids' faces. You can tangibly feel the desire in a lot of these situations. Here's Vanuatu, a little island nation, and sometimes we just got a little room with huts we're speaking to these kids. Here's students in the Philippines just pouring it out their books. Kids praying in Fiji. Here's kids in Peru raising their hands, asking for the Lord to be their Savior. Robin took this picture. We had a primary school. I do this experiment where I put the parts of a pin in a can and I add energy and random change and say, well, the pin make itself, because the cell is way more complex. Then I add a firecracker, blow the lid off the can, and then I pull out a reassembled pin. And the response is always immediate laughter, because it's so absurd. And then I follow up by explaining you realize what your textbooks are telling you, what the movies that talk about aliens forming everywhere over the universe just by random chance, evolution making life, it's a billion times more absurd than the idea 7 parts of a pin can come together. And you just laughed at that. And it makes a point they never forget. But look at the kids in this picture. It ranges everywhere from joy to laughter to total surprise and wonder. Look at the kid there on the right. Oh, it just disappeared. So just wrapping up, their interest in the Bible increases, their English comprehension increases, salvation's result. We've seen all those results as we go over there. And I'm going to wrap up right there. But the resources that are out there, all of them are like, the evidence doesn't typically change someone, but they put truth in front of people that people have to deal with. It's like putting a pebble in someone's shoe. It's irritating. If you're trained to believe something that's wrong is really wrong, and the truth is there but you don't want to face it, but it's put in front of you with love, with kindness, not with argumentativeness, with the desire to help someone come to know the truth, it's like that irritant that they have to deal with. And that's what these resources are, the little videos, pass them on to others. Sign up for the newsletter. It only comes out 4 times a year. It's short. It's just 3 or 4 articles, and it talks about the ministry and has updates on these overseas programs. It always comes with the ability for you to be part of it, help buy the books to go to the kids, and so on. Now, the other thing I've done are these creation devotionals, and they're really interesting. And nobody can resist reading what's on their birthday. So even somebody who's an atheist, they kind of want to know what it says on their birthday, so you can get it to people. And I always encourage people, if you're going to give away a book to someone, even if it's your own child or grandchild, take time to write something about your story in the front. What God has done for you, some miracle, some reason you trust Him. Because people will read it, and you have no idea how it'll impact them, and it makes it personal. And then there's just 2 new things that have come out. A book was sent to me last summer from a man in Canada who was an avid creationist, but it's the most non-preachy book I've ever read. Like all my devotional pages, they basically end by talking about how this shows God had to have done it, or this shows how evolution's impossible. He doesn't go there. He writes some really interesting story, like he talks about going out, and it's all in italics, the first half of a page. He goes out with his dogs, and you know, he fixes a meal for himself, and he fixes a meal for his dogs, and one of them runs off, and it's the spring, and he goes and chases the dog to see what it's after. A fox comes, and it steals his food, and goes off and it eats it all, and he's thinking, oh man, why did I leave my food? This sneaky, rotten fox. And the next day, he hears a knock on his door, and the fox comes back and it says, man, I just felt so guilty, I had to return and apologize for taking your food. And that's the story, except it's much better than that if I was to take time to read it. And then he wraps up with just a couple paragraphs. And I don't know, I gotta read this, okay? And this is his wrap up. And every page and every story is like this, okay? And this one's called Conscious. After the italics part with the little fox story. I stole a Batman comic once, number 142, The Ruler of the Bewitched Valley. Took it from Wren's drugstore in 1961. It was quite the transaction. Though I came out ahead, I ended up the loser and bought a lifelong memory with a dime I didn't own. Why do we feel bad? And why is only half the puzzle. The more difficult question is how. How can a physical life form feel bad? Not from physical pain, like the nerves pounding from a hammer on a thumb. That type of pain is understandable. But the kind that melts into your emotions, flows into every corner of your mind. How this type of pain, if we're all we are as physical beings, can be there. Whether we like it or not, there's something within us called conscience. It's a mouthy little guy who knows all about us. How did this incorporeal person get inside of me? Me, a mass of muscle and bone. Where did he come from? Why is he never satisfied, never at peace? How does he know the second I'm awake? Couldn't he just stay in bed for another half hour and give me a tranquil head start on the day? Hey, you in there, leave me alone. If you won't go to sleep, then here, this'll help. I'll take a drink or a pill, maybe both. Must be something I can swallow to shut you up. Too bad about dogs. They can't look in wonder at the stars. Still, it must be a treat. No little guy running around in there. See, it's not preachy. It's the kind of book you give to someone with no interest in creation. And he talks about DNA and complexity in the fossil record and soft dinosaur tissue. And they're all just little stories you wonder where he's going. These stories were sent to a secular contest in the province of New Brunswick. Both 2019 and 2020, his stories won first and second place in the whole province of Canada for the best short stories written. And they're all about creation. So it's just a neat resource. The other one, I took 4 years, $200,000, 2 months of a full-time videographer to produce each 45-minute video to create a video curriculum. Now, it's called The Rocks Cry Out. It covers all these topics. There's whole sessions on inventions. There's whole sessions on ancient cultures. There's sessions on astronomy, genetics, ape man, dating methods, and so on. Our church uses them for the entire 5th grade curriculum of every 5th grader that goes through our church every year. And they're filmed on location. They're not just a bunch of PowerPoint slides, and they're not scripted. They're like that little slug slime video where there's, it's just spoken from the heart. They're really, really well done with animation and drone footage and nature footage. So 20 hours of viewing, and there's a Fiji documentary on what God's doing in these overseas nations. It's $40. It's like an investment that you can watch, pass on to your kids or grandkids, pass on to your youth pastor, make a difference in your church. Because they're not like super highly technical stuff. They're just visual and interesting. And along with it is a Christian's Guide to Refuting Evolution, where it's filled with video links, activities, pictures, demonstrations, and it walks through problems with chemical evolution, problems with biological evolution, problems with the mechanisms of evolution, problems with cosmic evolution, the matter of dating methods in the age of things, why it matters. Those are the subject headers, and it hits all the supposed proofs for evolution and what's being left out. The subtitles, what students aren't being told. So put the resources to use, and just what you do supports what we're doing overseas. And thank you for having me. I know I went way over, but I appreciate your patience.
All right, so let's, wasn't that a great talk? That was really
By the way,
fantastic.
that's my Sunday sermon. I've got about 6 Sunday sermons. That's my favorite. Wouldn't it be wonderful for everybody in your church to hear that? And then follow it up with like a Sunday night or Sunday afternoon or Saturday night Creation Emphasis weekend. But you got to get to your pastor and let him know this is going to help you people. And have you come to my website and watch some of my stuff, because it's not boring and it's really relevant. So put this stuff to use.
All right, so if you've got a question, let me know and I will run the mic to you, and then ask the question and give me the mic back, and then he'll turn his mic on. We've got some issues with the microphone, so.
And I'm going to sit down.
All right, so we'll start with this question right here.
Just curious, where is home base?
Robin and I were both born and raised in Ohio, grew up there, started our career. Are you not off yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's switch mics.
Okay, let's just use the one mic. You can run it back and forth. Or do you want to use this one?
All right, yeah. Yeah, I'll
Which one do you want
this
to
one.
use?
Those batteries are getting low.
Well, let me answer the question.
Yeah.
So, we spent the first 30 years of our life in Ohio, but Dow moved our research center up to Midland, Michigan, and I worked the next 17 years there in Michigan. So we have 4 kids. One of them's in Wisconsin with 2 little boys, grandkids. One of them's in Arvada here in Denver with 3 granddaughters. My son, who almost died of cancer, and daughter-in-law, who's fighting it right now. They're at a 99% Muslim country called Comoros off the coast of Africa, near Madagascar. And she flew in an emergency down to South Africa for emergency surgery and went through recovery, and now she's doing cancer treatment. They'll be living with us for probably at least the next year. They were due to come home for iteration. So, but it's Midland, Michigan. And I fly all over the world and all over the country from there. And our daughter, thank you, Robin. And our daughter is in New Zealand. So we have, our closest child is a 7-hour drive away, and our furthest one is about a 30-hour plane flight away with stops. Any other?
Okay. Any more questions? So he covered it all very thoroughly, so that leaving you without any questions at all, right?
Well, there's not a lot of highly technical stuff here.
Well, again, we didn't catch your website. I was wondering where.
Oh, thanks. I can just talk really loud. Tell you what, the website is searchforthetruth.net. The website searchforthetruth.net. Sign up for my newsletter. When you do, there's like the last 4 newsletters from last year. Just grab a set of them. At the bottom of every one is our website, my email, my phone number. Everything you need to know about the ministry is right there on the newsletters. But it's searchforthetruth.net. And you can watch most of my videos on the website. All of those little 2 and 3 minutes of past filmings are on the website. All of our resources are on the website. So yeah, everything that you might want is there and available. And I decided when I started this ministry, it belongs to God, it doesn't belong to me. So I give 100% carte blanche permission for anybody to use, copy, and share anything I do, including the stuff on the flash drive. So by purchasing it, you're supporting what I do, but feel free to copy it and put it to use, because the goal is to get the truth out.
I was just wondering what your background is, particularly in the sciences,
Sure.
and also in your theology.
Okay.
Rob's getting his exercise.
Yeah, this is fun. Kind of like watching you run back and forth. My degree is chemical engineering from the University of Cincinnati, and I worked as a research leader developing new products. So I kind of like to consider myself a very, I have used science all my life. I understand how it operates. I understand how to connect various observations to draw conclusions. I understand how to develop and format experiments in order to eliminate possibilities and options. And all my life as a researcher, you've had to sell your ideas and sell your improvements. So I've always done presentations, and that's led to what I do in speaking and teaching and talking about how science works. And sadly, what's presented as science and scientific evidence, for a large part, is not. It's a faith that ignores any problems that contradict that faith. Faith in cosmic evolution, chemical evolution, biological evolution. Any problems are just ignored. Or with stories are made up to just blend it into the belief system. Whereas science operates by honestly trying to falsify your belief, trying to show that it's wrong. And evolution is the only area of science, for the most part, where that's not done. So, yeah, and that helps. My theology, the Bible is the absolute inherent Word of God. It's meant to be understood in a clear, straightforward way. Jesus Christ is the only way to salvation. Most of Paul's letters center around the fallacy that we need to add something to what Christ has done in order to get to heaven. I'm very Baptist in my theology. I have difficulty understanding if we've done nothing to gain salvation other than admission that we can't do it, therefore admission that we are sinful and accept what He's done for us. And that when done in an absolute real way, is what brings us back into fellowship with God. And then our sins are as far as east to west. We are washed white as snow, and we're as scarlet as blood. Then somehow our further sins, if we don't stop doing them, are going to keep us from going from heaven. Makes no sense to me. Or we can then somehow lose our salvation by some one thing we have done wrong. So I am very much that if God's done it all, He's maintaining it all. That's my theology. So, okay.
All right, any more questions? All right.
Just recently started working in a school, and I do not know how you would get in there. And these kids, I'm considered a reading specialist or something, whatever, but I pull kids to help them with reading. And sometimes we'll have books, and it's like, it's talking about evolutionary stuff, and they're like, why, how? And I'm like, I know I can't answer this the way Jesus would want me to.
It's like your hands are
but
tied.
I just kind of go, it just is, okay?
Yeah.
And I was even in a class the other day just waiting, and these kids, something came up with science, and they, at age like 3rd grade, they're already billions of years, all
Yep.
that already.
Yep.
And so I do not know how we could get, Christian schools, yes, but how would we get it into the public school again? I don't know. In prayer, yes.
Yeah.
Is there any that you know of for Congress or anything else?
Or is there any hope?
Those are really, really tough questions. I've been struggling with them for 30 years, so I'm not going to have here's a definitive answer. Go as far as your spirit will allow you to go with the truth. When the millions and billions of years come up, it may get you in trouble. Because all kids are so fascinated with dinosaurs, and God has given us this phenomenal tool. You realize we have found multiple examples of dinosaur bones that still have soft, stretchy tissue inside. Do you think that could happen if those have been in the ground for millions of years? They'll draw the right conclusion. The vast majority of ways of figuring out how old this earth are indicate that it's actually not millions of years old. They just don't show up in your textbooks. You got to start kind of young, because by the time they get into the junior high, they're not as receptive, and they're not even listening necessarily. But then again, they are. So go as far as the Holy Spirit allows you to go in getting that truth out there. And when you have the opportunity, these books are phenomenal because they're short. They're just 3 paragraphs, and kids, they're fascinating about these fish that climb waterfalls and lizards that turn off their heart, and they're filled with this evidence for the rock layers having been laid down rapidly. And all of a sudden, kids will start to connect the dots. And I think, in a way, COVID did us an advantage, because a good portion of the culture, maybe not 50%, they saw the lies. They see the narrative is the only thing that's being allowed to be taught, and anything that doesn't fit the narrative is being left out, and you're being lied to. And it happened over and over again. So I think there might be more of a receptiveness than we realize going on in the background. So just use the tools you have and the advantages you have. If it's possible to send them to websites like mine where they can watch short videos. We live in a perfect storm of disaster in our culture, because we live in an entertainment culture, we live in a video-driven culture, we live in a short attention span culture, we live in a worship of sports and heroes and a not thinking deeply culture, we live in a distraction culture, we live in a culture permeated by pornography, which inherently drives people away from a desire for holiness and an internal guilt. That's why people hide it. We live in a drug culture. So there's a perfect storm that's up against this generation. And there is always hope. Because I'll guarantee you, this isn't the last time there's been a culture that's looked like it's really heading toward incredible darkness. It's happened throughout history. Israel was there, England was there, other cultures are there, and God's brought them out of it. Fiji was absolutely the most decadent, evil country on the face of this planet in the early 1800s. The man who unified the islands bragged he'd eaten 980 human beings. They raised children to eat them. They did human sacrifices. They would build temples and bury 2 men at each of the 4 corners and bury 8 men alive while building their temples. And it was the norm. It was what you do. There was nothing wrong with it. There was such an evil culture. And it was Jesus Christ, the knowledge that God became a man and died for their sins, that reached the hierarchy of the nation, including that king. And he realized, how can I eat a human being when God became a human being made in our image? And the whole nation transformed. And thousands of churches, and this was when the Methodist Church was a phenomenal mission-sending denomination, transformed that nation. So if God can do it there, and they were in way sharp shape than we are, he can do it here. So there's always hope. But we are up against a lot. And I think God expects us to get the truth in front of people. And that's going to be a huge starting point. And this area of deception is undergirding everything else. If you can absolutely destroy the trust in God's word, everything else is going to tumble and everything's going to become morally relative. And we are way down that road. And remember what I said, you're the 0.01% who know this stuff. So we have got to take it seriously sitting here in this room and get stuff out there. Whatever you can use to get it in front of people, get it in front of them. So thank you.
How did you end up starting your ministry when you came out of college and all that?
I'll start talking. If you get on my newsletter list, the next book I'm working on, I'm calling it Fingerprints of God, 50 Miracles in 50 Years. I've looked at my life from the college all the way up to the present and seen how God has weaved my life together to answer that question. I was an agnostic coming out of college. I wasn't antagonistic toward God, but he's irrelevant because he taught everything could be explained without him. I'm an engineer, I'm a researcher, I love science. Everything had been explained by evolution in my mind. Okay, that's who I was. Same as my wife. She believed pretty much it's evolution's a fact. But God kept putting people in my life that were Christians and invited me to Bible study. And in that day and age, you still got married in Christian churches. So we got married in a church. And another miracle was, it was either going to be a Lutheran church or a Presbyterian church. The Lutheran churches, they were just kind of dry. I don't want to be insulting because there was Christians in all these denominations. But the Presbyterian church was closest. It has this vibrant storytelling, enthusiastic, fun to listen to pastor. But my wife had this vision of when she got married, she was going to walk in her wedding dress down the middle aisle of a church, and this church had 2 side aisles. So the only reason we didn't join that church was because it didn't have a middle aisle. And it turned out it was this super liberal church with a homosexual choir director that believed everybody is going to go to heaven if they're just a good enough person. And that would have been our church. We ended up in the only Presbyterian church in the county that was an on-fire, Bible was the truth and reality of God. Everybody is destined to hell without Jesus Christ pastor. And we started to hear this stuff. Well, I'm stubborn as a mule, and that leads to the opening that we got. God literally had to take me to the point of death, where I had double pneumonia, was on pure oxygen, and still dying. And then all of a sudden got better just to get my attention. And when you almost die, it changes your perspective. Is this all there is to life? You earn some money, you build a house, you get married, you have some kids, you have some fun, and you die. Is that all there is? And you start thinking about those things. And ultimately, it took about a year, but I gave my life to the Lord. And within months, a speaker comes to our church to talk about the evidence for creation, which I thought was totally silly. Like, what kind of silliness is this? It's been proven scientific fact. Oh yeah, I know God exists and Jesus is who he said, but they used evolution to make everything. See, when we become a Christian, we drag into our belief, we drag into our salvation all of our misconceptions, all of our wrong thoughts, all of our wrong beliefs, and then we have to either yield them to the truth or not. And just like God will never force us to believe, he won't force us to grow as a Christian. We have to choose to do so. And when that speaker spoke about the worldwide flood and the evidence for the worldwide flood, I immediately knew that if what he was saying was true, then everything I'd been taught about biology and geology and anthropology and earth history and the age of things, if the flood was real, then all that couldn't be true. It had to be wrong. It was the key point that, and I just started, and this was clear back in the early 80s. There wasn't a lot around other than ICR. But the more I studied it, the more I realized it became real, and that's the task God gave me for my life. We are his workmanship, created to do good works in Jesus Christ. And he makes us all different, and he gives us all different passions, and all different abilities, and all different desires, and all different missions fields. And I've just been at it ever since, and that's been, over 30 years ago. So that's a little nutshell. The book I'm writing, I'm taking all these God stories, and I'm weaving them all together to show them how it ultimately has led to a little insignificant introvert engineer nerd being used by the Lord of the universe to reach hundreds of thousands of kids in public school systems of other countries. And it's just neat to see all the threads we've woven together to have that happen over those years. So if you're on my newsletter list, it's probably going to be another year before the book's done, but I think you'll really enjoy the story. So, thanks for asking that question.